The voice of Sherry, durian nasian.
Anything can happen Friday. The art and cultural side of Southeast Asia. Hello and welcome to Durian ASEAN. You're with Gowri today on your Anything Can Happen Friday. And of course, Friday is the day for all your social cultural topics from arts, culture, music, theater, fashion, and whatnot. And for today, I have a guest who is joining me all the way from Shanghai. And we're going to talk about the importance of cultural exchange in the region. And of course, I'm speaking to Kristopher, who is joining me all the way from Shanghai. So, hi, Chris.
Hello. Hi, Gowri.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Right. So, perhaps a little introduction to yourself first. As the president and CEO of KMP Artist, what do you do with the company, and what KMP Artist is about for all our listeners?
So, I suppose the basic way to introduce it is that KMP is actually Kristopher McDowell Productions.
Mm-hmm.
My mother spelled Kristopher with a K. I don't know why. It's pretty unique. And I started the company just over 11 years ago now. And when I had some partners join in about 6 years ago, we shortened the title to KMP.
Right.
So I just offer that because typically the first question is, what does that stand for?
That was
the decision made by the partners when they joined into the company. But in essence, we are sort of a three purpose or purpose company,
right.
And that is first and foremost to represent different artists, different performing groups, and also visual artists, and to really manage their careers, work with them to develop a strategy based upon what their desires are in their career, and help them to determine what their potential trajectory is in particular markets. By particular markets, I of course mean certain countries,
right.
certain regions within certain countries, etc. The second purpose is really to find them work, to get them connected with presenting organizations, corporations, private funders, sometimes get them grant monies to be able to cover their expenses, and really kind of act as a matchmaker between different venues and different presenting entities and the artists themselves. The third component of what we do to a certain degree is also producing. Oftentimes when a group is touring internationally, while there may be specific money tied to certain venues for performances or exhibitions, we like to fill out a tour and perhaps find them what we call fill-in dates. So, for example, if a show is touring from Asia in the United States and they have 3 or 4 performances on weekends, what KMP does is acts as a producer in some cases to sort of fill in all of the weekdays in between those weekends, so that they're not feeling like they're just sitting around for 4 or 5 days between performances. And when we do those, we are usually engaging in enrichment activities with the communities that they're traveling to, working in universities, doing master classes, residency programs, and also potentially some collaborations with other local artists. So it's sort of a multi-function company, but it's all focused on really supporting performing arts and visual arts and those who present those things.
Right. And you also give a lot of speeches and lectures as well to help these people, especially when it comes to marketing their performance in other countries. And maybe some example of what are the topics that you've touched on that was very helpful for these performers.
So yes, sort of as an aside, separate from KMP, I've sort of been asked in different capacities, really as an independent consultant or an independent speaker, just to work with different groups to sort of prepare them. Certain groups will come to me and say, look, I really want to tour in the United States, but they don't necessarily have all of the materials ready that the U.S. venues need to see in advance. And so what I do is I'll help them to prepare those things. And then in some cases, then KMP will want to represent them and tour them. In other cases, it's not necessarily, I mean, working with me as a consultant or a teacher doesn't necessarily bind you to working through KMP, but it does tend to happen that way.
Okay.
Sometimes just because there's a trust level and an understanding that it's already in existence.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know about the KMP artist itself. Of course, it focuses on cultural exchange, and you've done a lot of work in terms of international cultural exchange in America, Asia, Australia. And why did you choose to focus on this? What's the importance of having these cultural exchange programs?
You know, I think it's a really important question that you're asking, and I don't think a lot of people ask that question. And I think my primary motivation when I started really focusing on cultural exchange around the Pacific Rim, as it were, in particular, is because we work with, KMP works with a lot of universities in the United States, and in North America for that matter. We also work with universities in Canada. But the real issue that I found about 6 years ago is that the younger generation of Americans, Generation X to a certain extent, but certainly the millennial generation especially, are very open to an understanding of Asia Pacific. And because of various reasons, their parents and their grandparents really don't know a lot about Asia, and they don't teach us Asian geography in our sort of grammar school and high school days in America. So it's a sort of unknown, and there is a very vague understanding of China and Japan because of their relationships over the years to the United States, but there isn't a really clear understanding of how huge Asia is, and even Asia Pacific reaching into Australasia. I think there's a real question in the minds of the youth and the undergraduate age students. So we saw an opportunity in touring work from different parts of Asia Pacific into the United States as a way to sort of give these students, give this particular demographic a lens or a window or a snapshot, for lack of a better word, as to what's happening culturally in these countries today. Because, as you're well aware, there's a lot of change happening throughout Asia and has been for several years now, and there is a lot of exciting growth. There's also some hardship. There's also some success. So it's really interesting to expose younger American generations to work from Malaysia, to work from the Philippines, to work from South Korea, to work from Indonesia, and then they get a sense of, oh wow, that's what's going on there. That's the difference between these countries and these cultures. And what we're finding is not only is it starting a really important dialogue among the American students, but also there is a great diversity in the United States. So we already have so many different Asian Americans. So it's also giving a sense of identity to the second and third generation Americans who maybe they had ancestors that came from Southeast Asia or Northern Asia. So it's all of that. And also what we're finding, and this is kind of a perk that we never intended, is that the students then on their summer vacation or when they take a break in their studies between an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree, they're deciding to travel to these countries where they've seen work and they've been inspired. So we've seen it actually boost tourism in places, which is really, really exciting.
Okay. And you mentioned an interesting point earlier, I think, about how the older generations in the U.S., like your parents, grandparents, have little knowledge about Asia Pacific, probably apart from China. So how has the response been so far when you bring all these different acts from Southeast Asia or Asia Pacific itself to America? And it must be something that's very new for them, especially these kids in the universities. How have they responded so far? What are some of the feedbacks that you've gotten?
Well, I think the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think primarily because, as we all know, it doesn't matter which culture it is, there is a sense or an element of fear or danger in the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so when we introduce work from different countries, there's this automatic demystification or sort of this sense of, oh, well, they're just like me, only they have a different background. You know, so there's this sense of identity that begins to happen, which to me is quite beautiful because it shows that the world is actually a very small place and that we all are part of the human race as opposed to, you know, different cultures. And there's a beauty in beginning to understand one another's cultures. So, like I said, it's been overwhelmingly positive, and I think that the real mission that we have been careful to roll out at KMP is introducing work that is really accessible to a Western audience. And that means, at least for the first 6 years that we've been doing this, we have experienced the most success and the best feedback when we have presented dance, especially a contemporary dance, because it's a reflection of the culture today, but also music. And it is in the nonverbal performances that Westerners or Americans in particular can sort of gather their own and form their own opinions and feelings. And they find a way to identify because there isn't the language barrier.
Right.
And that's been quite exciting to see. But now that we've been doing music and dance for 6 years, we're starting to venture into theater and other genres where we're introducing work in its native language and we're subtitling the work in English. So we're starting to get a bit more adventurous. And I think ultimately this depends on what market in the United States you're talking about. There's a greater understanding and an openness to Asia Pacific in general in cities, major metropolitan cities like New York, like Chicago, like San Francisco, like Los Angeles. So we're finding that those markets and those cities are now becoming very open. Even Houston, Texas, and the capital of Texas, Austin, Texas, are really opening up to this sort of idea of understanding ASEAN countries and cultures, but all Asia Pacific, which is really exciting. And they're getting more adventurous in their taste for different genres and getting a sense of the cultures through those performances or through that visual art.
And how many states in the U.S. have you reached out to in terms of hosting this performances or acts from Asia?
Well, we have actively reached out to all 50 of the contiguous United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. We have a pretty extensive network where we have toured our American artists pretty much in most every state. I think the only state we have yet to work in is North Dakota, which is which means we've covered a lot of ground. We've also worked quite a bit in Canada and in Mexico because it's such an easy drive to get people across the border. But in particular, the work from Asia is really catching on in the West Coast and in the Midwest. And then, of course, New York on the East Coast because it's such a cultural mecca. But we're finding that slowly the East Coast is also now coming on board. I think that, in general, so many Americans have European heritage, and the Atlantic Ocean is so much smaller than the Pacific Ocean that the connection between the East Coast of America and Europe is still very, very strong.
Right.
So they often, when East Coasters think of international, they often think of across the Atlantic as opposed to going in the other direction.
Okay.
And we're finding that that's changing a lot. And I think North Carolina, the state of North Carolina, and the state of New York are really the leaders in that. And slowly we're starting to see some openness from other states in the East Coast. So it's quite exciting to see the sort of wave that's been sweeping the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess to answer your question most specifically, we have been successful at engaging, I believe it's about 27 or 28. So more than half of the U.S. have actually taken Asian product over the last 5 years, which is, I think, a huge success for us.
Very promising as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss more about the cultural exchanges that's been happening between KMP and Asia.
Anything can happen Friday. The art and cultural side of Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're still with Gowri here on your Anything Can Happen Friday. And today we're discussing about the importance of cultural exchanges between continents. And to help me with the discussion, of course, I'm speaking to Kristopher McDowell, all the way from KMP Artists in the US, but he's in Shanghai at the moment. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. And let's continue with our discussion. And maybe for this part, I want to ask you, when you bring all these acts from Asia to America, whether it's North America, Mexico, or in the United States itself, were there times that you had to alter certain aspects of the performance in order to make it more relatable to the American audience?
So, yes, the short answer is yes. Usually, I am very, very conscious of the artist's intent, or the intent of the creator of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So I also recognize it's very sensitive to suggest that things be changed. But it's also very important that, to me, on a personal level, it's very important that the work is understood in America, and doesn't confuse the American audience, because we want them to be inspired and open. And so the changes that we suggest are really usually very minor alterations, and really it's about, again, just mutual understanding. I think the ways that we have altered projects is there are certain shows that we have toured in the States that didn't have what we call in the industry a lighting plot, meaning they didn't have a fully fleshed out lighting design for the performance itself. And so what we've done is we've helped certain groups to develop that sort of a technical design, lighting design or sound design that is competitive with other work that they've seen, that other Americans have seen, so that it doesn't feel like it's substandard, because the work itself is not. It's quite high quality, but I think it's the way in which it's introduced. I suppose we call it sort of the bells and whistles, or the shiny points, is what can we do to enhance the performance in a way that satisfies sort of the American attention span.
Right.
And the other way that we have been faced with some minor alterations is when we have toured work in theater work, which is a recent venture for us, as I was explaining earlier in our conversation.
Yeah.
When we're touring a work, for example, that is delivered in, say, in Mandarin or in any other language rather than English, sometimes the subtitles, when you're doing a direct translation, become confusing, especially with Mandarin, which is why I bring up Mandarin in particular.
Of course.
Because some words don't have an exact translation in English. So we have had to look at the work that we're subtitling and say, how do we relay the exact meaning that's implied rather than doing a direct translation? So that's been a bit challenging, but it's also been very interesting But I find that Mandarin has been the most complicated in that respect. But many of the other Asian languages are a little easier to translate, which is good. But those are really the only aspects that we have.
So it is the changes are mostly technical, but nothing to do with the content itself.
Really, no. Like I said, I try to respect what the creator or the director or the writer. I really want to respect what that is. Now, that is not to say that I haven't seen some really amazing things that America just isn't quite ready for yet.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting there.
Okay.
I think the more that people are exposed, the easier. But I do think if the content feels like government propaganda, it's tricky.
Right.
But as long as it's a person's point of view, then I think it's important to express that.
Okay. And in terms of filtering this act, if I may use that term, because you're reaching out to all over Asia Pacific, do you have certain criteria or certain things, certain elements that you look for before you decide that, okay, this will be good for the American audience, that they can accept this, they will learn from this?
In an ideal world, yes. But then I find that there are exceptions. So we do have we've been touring work from Asia into the States now for 6 years. So we certainly have a method. We certainly have a process that we follow. However, this is why I started doing some consulting and speaking and workshops on the side, because I found that there were a lot of artists that had really great work, but they just didn't have the package, as it were. And by package, I mean that we need to have a technical writer. We need to have a lighting design. We need to have, a show that is truly tourable, because if it's very heavy on props and scenery and set pieces, it's very expensive, as you can imagine, to transport that stuff across the Pacific Ocean. There are a lot of music groups that have beautiful, traditional instruments that come from different countries around Asia, and how do we expose audiences to unique instruments without sort of spending all the money on bringing those instruments across the ocean, and then the artists don't really make any money because they've spent tens of thousands of US dollars to ship it across the ocean. So there are things that we look for. We look for video content. We look for someone who's got a great package. I think the most important part of that package is that they have really high quality promotional images and photographs of the performers and the performance itself, because that's the way we can then sell it to audiences in the United States, which is sort of the business aspect of what we're talking about. But it needs to be exciting from an image perspective.
Right.
But like I said, I have fallen in love with work that I know is right for America, and the artists or the group just don't have that package together. And that's when I sort of step aside and say, okay, let me take off my KMP hat for a minute and let me help you get this package together so that you can be competitive in the U.S. market or in North America.
Right. And when it comes to these young people in the universities, are they more receptive towards more modern, contemporary acts from Asia, or are they more attracted to traditional art forms from Asia?
So what you're asking is a very controversial question, actually, and the more but I talk about it all the time, so I'm happy to delve into it. But it is controversial because Asia has, and all of the countries within Asia, Asia Pacific, Australasia, all of your countries have incredible history, and when you compare it to America, which is so young, it's very, very difficult for us to even comprehend how much history and how long and rich that history is. So it's I'm very careful when I say that, yes, because we're delivering work to a particular demographic of usually undergraduate age students in the United States, and then hopefully we find a broader audience as well, but that's our primary demographic. It needs to feel contemporary. It needs to feel modern day. However, it's also, and this is why we're working with universities a lot, it's also extremely important that there be some element of tradition. So, you can't ignore the traditions and the rich history within the Asian countries. And so it's important that the work is rooted in tradition. Perhaps there is a traditional costume. Perhaps there is a traditional instrument. Perhaps there is a traditional dance move or movement that is incorporated into what is being delivered as a modern day snapshot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So basically, it has to be modern contemporary, but still have some traditional touch to it.
I think that's very important because, again, my mission for the work that KMP is touring, my mission is to introduce cultures.
Right.
But in America in particular, if you don't introduce the culture in a contemporary manner, it's often looked at as something that is for their grandparents or their great-grandparents. And we want it to be exciting and stimulating and dare I use the word, here's the controversy, sexy. There has to be something very attractive to a younger audience to make them say, I want to learn more about that culture. I want to fall in love with that culture. And that's what we're really trying to do with the art that we bring over. But if it doesn't have a traditional element, I don't know that it's truly worth touring.
Okay. Right. And I think when it comes to young people, not just in the United States, but everywhere around the world, they all have a very short attention span. So it's very important to have certain elements that is sure to attract them. Otherwise, they'll just get bored quite easily.
Well, technology has done that to us, and technology is a very powerful and wonderful thing, but it definitely has changed the way that we all think and we all take things in and absorb. So I think that's another thing that you're bringing up that I think is quite exciting within Asia, is that we're seeing technology incorporated into live performances. We're seeing technology incorporated into visual art exhibitions. So I'm really excited to tour more work that is sort of a fusion between technology and the arts.
So I'm sure you get a lot of people, a lot of acts from Asia probably approaching you and asking you, how can we market this in the U.S. or are we attractive enough? Do we have all the right things? What advice do you usually give them in order to help them create something competitive, something attractive for the American audience?
Well, I have many opinions on that, and I could probably talk about that for about an hour, maybe more. But really, my role, or the role that I have sort of evolved into within the industry, is really to take work that already exists. So I don't really have direct advice. I have a lot of thought, but I don't really have direct advice to say, here's the kind of work that we need to have created, other than to say what I just indicated, and that is, I think the world in general is looking to Asia to find that work that is a cross-section between performing arts and technology. But I guess my role is to look at the work that already exists and to say, is this going to be exciting to a particular audience or demographic within the United States? And is this going to excite them and stimulate them and want them to research and perhaps visit this particular country?
Right.
So I think that's really and I hope that's not too general, but that's really what I'm doing in the world right now, and what I'm looking for. And then, if there are things that need to be discussed or certain packages that need to be developed, then, I'm happy to help with that. But essentially, you have to have something that's already ready to tour.
Okay.
And then I can help you.
Right. Okay. And apart from bringing acts from Asia to America, do you maybe plan to bring some of the students over to Asia to watch the performances here firsthand?
Yes, great question. So, I mean, we started the conversation talking about cultural exchange, and that is absolutely the biggest element, and that is it needs to be about exchange. It needs to go in both directions.
Right.
I have taken two different large groups of undergraduate age students. One was a group of 41 students. The other was a group of, I think there were 53 of us.
Okay.
And we traveled to multiple countries in Asia to just see work, to meet artists, to go to visual art exhibitions, and just kind of immerse them and expose them. This is, I would do this more often, but it's very expensive for a university to invest in that number of, people traveling abroad. But we have made it happen a couple of times. And I think something that I'm now doing on an annual basis, at least twice per year, is I'm bringing over producers and what we call arts presenters, who are the sort of programmers and executive directors of major venues in the United States. And I'm bringing them over twice per year, and next year we're talking about doing it 3 times, so that they can come out and they can look at different work, because they are in essence the one who makes the decision for the types of programs that are brought in for their community.
Right.
So this is a very important element of the mission of exchange that you've addressed. So yes, I'd like to do even more, but that is something we are doing now.
Any particular countries in Asia that you're looking at?
Well, right now we are we've been working in China for some time now. America has been doing a lot of exchange with Japan for some time now. Right. We've been working a lot with South Korea over the past 4 years. So my focus and energy has begun to turn to ASEAN countries, to Southeast Asia, because I find that there is still a lack of understanding in the American general public, at least, about these countries. And, it's interesting that people aren't aware of the sheer size and population of the country of Indonesia. People don't realize it's one of the largest countries, highest populated countries, I should say, in the world. But, because, again, going back to something I said before, not to belabor, but they don't teach us Asian geography in America. So we don't know. And we don't know where, I do, but we don't know where Malaysia is, and we don't know where, Indonesia is. We don't know where the Philippines is, and we don't know where Cambodia is. So I think the mission that I have really begun to take on is being able to define not just geographically where they are, but who is from this country, and what sort of cultures and what sort of art comes out of these countries, and why. So that is a relatively new focus over the last couple of years.
All right. So we're almost at the end of our segment for today. And just before we finish, I want to ask, you were in Malaysia recently, of course, for the Bora Arts series. Were there any particular acts that really intrigued you, or what did you think about the performing arts scene in Malaysia?
Well, first of all, it was my first time, not my first time in Malaysia, but my first time visiting that particular art series and the Georgetown Festival. So let me just say I had a really remarkable time, and I will say that I believe that the Barak Arts series was incredibly well run, very well managed. I am really astounded at the size of support staff they have and what they were able to achieve. And I just had a really beautiful experience. I came specifically looking for work from Malaysia, and I can't disclose in particular which companies we're talking to, because we're now in sort of deep conversations about how we can tour some work. But I will tell you that it's really rooted in music and dance, the work that I found, and from Malaysia in particular. So there were more than a few things that were really exciting to me. And I have to tell you, I travel the world. I go to a lot of these festivals and conferences, and it's rare that I even find one thing. So I think that says a lot for what Block Art Series and what Georgetown are doing, because they really are trying to find the best work,
right?
But also the work that speaks to a global audience, which is really inspiring. And it's more than I expected I would be attracted to in a 2-day series and session.
So thank you so much, Kristopher McDowell, for joining us today on our Anything Can Friday segment and enlightening us about the importance of cultural exchanges between continents.
Oh, look, thank you for having me. I'm absolutely happy to talk anytime.